Whew. The 60s, man. The 60s. What a formidable time the 60s was. You know, I didn't live through it, but I've studied it a lot, and I mean, just to think the changes that we went through, like the change like our country went through, and the major innovations in film, the major innovations in music. I mean, look right here. I mean, Bob Dylan reigned in the 60s. You know, Bob Dylan basically, he completely changed the game. He totally decided, okay, this is what rock music is going to be. Bob Dylan's the man. Anyway, so BretFlix, here I am, Mr. BretFlix, thinking about the 60s. I'm going to give you my top 5 favorite films of the 60s. Don't Look Back, directed by D.A. Pennebaker from 1967. Now, I mentioned, oh, Bob Dylan reigned. You've seen me wear a couple Bob Dylan shirts on the show already. If you haven't caught on by now, which I know I've been a little cryptic about it, is I'm a major Bob Dylan fan. I love Bob Dylan. So, I mean, when Criterion announced they were releasing Don't Look Back, I was like, that's a day one buy for me. Don't Look Back, it's a really famous documentary about Bob Dylan back, like, right before he made his transition into being electric. And in fact, his first rock album, electric rock album, is called Bringing It All Back Home. And a lot of the footage he captures here is songs Dylan recorded for that album, but it's all like acoustic versions of those songs. So it's a great look back into that time of the 60s, of Dylan, just, I mean, when he was at the peak of his fame. And but it's also at the same time not the most flattering look at who Dylan was. In fact, just by watching this movie alone and not being a fan of his music, you would probably kind of hate Bob Dylan after watching this, because I mean, at this point Dylan was getting pretty strung out. He was tired, constantly traveling. I mean, and he was being hailed as this prophet and this voice of a generation, this voice of the left wing, and he didn't really see himself as any of that. He was being labeled with these labels that he didn't agree with, that he didn't want to be, and it really started to get to him. And you see him lashing out at a lot of people, lashing out at the people he's touring with, lashing out at friends. And so it's kind of, I mean, as a Bob Dylan fan, I love watching this movie, but it's not exactly a side of him I enjoy exploring that much. I think other films you should see would be Martin Scorsese's No Direction Home. That's a lot more flattering look at who Dylan is, and also Todd Haynes's I'm Not There. Because there's so many sides to Dylan. There's not just one opinion you can have of him. There's only opinions you can have of him at any given point of his career, and they're all going to be radically different. So yes, Don't Look Back. It also features what I've heard to be the first music video of all time. I don't know if that's true. I should probably fact check that one, but you know, it's Bob Dylan doing his Subterranean Homesick Blues, a classic. And you know, he has the sign, and he's throwing the sign. The signs have the lyrics of the song, and as the song plays, he's throwing the lyrics down to the ground. It was brilliantly parodied by Weird Al for a song that he did called Bob. So yeah, my number 5 pick for my favorite film of the 60s is D.A. Pennebaker's Don't Look Back, from 1967. You know, Bob Dylan's the man. Vivre sa vie, directed by JeanLuc Godard from 1962. Yeah, so, you know, one thing, I said in my intro how the 60s was a really formative time for film history. That's mostly thanks to the French and the French New Wave, and so I'm actually very drawn to those films, and just to see how how innovative they were and how big game changers those films were. And probably my favorite film of that time is Vivre sa vie. This is probably from the greatest of the French New Wave, Mr. JeanLuc Godard. Interesting pick, I feel like, or maybe hopefully film buffs will feel it's an interesting pick, because this isn't the most talked about Godard film, especially of the 60s. You think 60s Godard, you'd probably pick something like BretFlix. While I do like BretFlix, one thing I do have to admit is I'm really not that big of a Godard fan in general. I am a critic of his. I am one of the people that believes that his movies are way too self-indulgent. That I feel like, his films, feel kind of arrogant, and how like they're like, "Ooh, I'm smarter than you. Look at my symbolism. Be impressed by this." And then you get a lot of film buffs finding the meaning in his films. I mean, to me, it's just I don't really care about any of that. I generally find his movies to be pretty boring, especially like A Woman Is a Woman I didn't enjoy, and Weekend I didn't really like, and Pierrot Le Fou I found really, really boring. I like other films of his. I enjoy Band of Outsiders, I enjoy BretFlix, but I love Vivre sa vie. Vivre sa vie, which is the French title. The American title is My Life to Live. Is a very intimate examination of a woman and the decisions she makes of her own life. It can be kind of a frustrating movie, because this woman, played by the great Anna Karina, makes decisions that as an audience member you're like, that's kind of dumb, you shouldn't be doing that, but like the title says, it's her life to live. And so I think there's kind of an important message here, important feminist message, important just kind of message about people in general. Don't try to control what people do, let them make their own decisions, it's their own lives. You don't exactly have to agree with it, but you have to allow them the freedom to do whatever they want. Now, part of the reason why I love this movie and not other Godard films is because I feel like his other films are just so unhinged, and which I like that, but I just never feel like there's any focus. Like there's other filmmakers that make unhinged films that I really enjoy. Like, I really enjoy. For example, like Three Kings, or any Scorsese movie, where movies with high energy that are really wild, yet they're still focused on a story. They're still focused on characters. It's not just like, hey, look at me, look at what I can do with the camera. I don't know. I've talked a lot about how I really enjoy visual flair, but there's just something about Godard that just doesn't reach me. Except for this movie. This movie has a lot of very interesting sequences, a lot of very interesting shots, but it never loses focus of the subject of the movie. It never feels like he's pointing his fingers at himself, say, hey, look at me, I'm a director, I'm so cool. It's still very focused. It's still just a very intimate look at this woman in her life. So my number 4 pick, Vivre sa vie, directed by JeanLuc Godard from 1962. "2001: A Space Odyssey", directed by Stanley Kubrick, 1968. Yep, 2001, an obvious choice, and what can you say? It's another one of those, what can you say? Because it's already been said a million times. It's one of the most praised films in film history. If Citizen Kane isn't the greatest movie of all time, it's Vertigo. If Vertigo isn't the greatest movie of all time, it's 2001: A Space Odyssey. I'm not really going to talk much about the movie itself, because, like I said, there's not much you can say that hasn't already been said. But I will kind of mention, like, my first time seeing this movie. I was at a buddy of mine, Dana. Hi Dana, how you doing? I was at his house. We were hanging out one day. got nothing to do, it's summertime, and he found out that I had never seen this movie. I had heard of it. I had seen it parodied a million times, but I'd never actually seen the movie, and so he's like, "You idiot, sit down, I'm going to play this movie for you." And he warned me, he's like, "It's not exactly the most entertaining movie there is, but it's still like an incredible experience." And he was certainly not wrong about that. One thing that struck me right off the bat is kind of just how, I won't say how modern like the movie feels or how modern the effects are, but just how realistic they are, even by today's standards. You know, we've had a lot of space movies since this time, and just nothing has really captured it as well. You know, they've been captured well. You know, like recently, you know, we had The Martian, Ridley Scott's The Martian. You know, that was a really awesome movie, and you know, there's even great sequences in lesser movies like Mission to Mars or something, where it's like you kind of capture just the feeling of space, but nothing has measured up to this. Nothing has matched this, and this movie came out almost 50 years ago. So I mean, the first time I'm watching this, I'm just really taken back. Like, this was made in the 60s. Like, this movie's incredible, and I will still watch this and be totally blown away by it. It is a visionary, just colossal masterpiece. And you know, I mentioned that it's like, oh, it's not the most entertaining movie. That's true, but once it gets to the very end, and you know, when you get to like the last like quarter of the movie, I've never tried acid. I'm gonna admit that right now. I've never tried acid, but I imagine the last quarter of the movie or so, or maybe last fifth of the movie, is what an acid trip might feel like. So people, I mean, if you've never seen this movie and this is kind of your first time hearing about it, you're probably very puzzled by what this movie must be like, and I like that. I'm going to leave it at that because I want you to see this. This is an essential watch. So, another one of my favorites of the 60s, Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey from 1968. Harakiri, directed by Masaki Kobayashi, forgive me if I'm pronouncing that wrong, from 1962. Yes, this freaking movie is amazing. I've only seen it like 3 times in the past 100 years, but it resonates with me so much. This is an incredibly powerful movie. It's about a guy who he's an out of work samurai, and he's starving, and he feels like, you know, he'd rather have an honorable death than just to starve to death. So, you know, for samurais it means committing harakiri. Now, one thing they would do is like they would request an audience, people who they really respect and admire, to witness it. I guess that makes it more honorable. There's a lot about that kind of side of Japanese culture I don't really understand. You know, I respect it and everything, but I don't really understand it. And also, this movie doesn't really understand it either. It questions that. You know, because honor is such a huge part of Japanese culture, and this movie basically says the things that you guys do for honor are really dishonorable. So, a really controversial movie, as you can imagine. Now, one of the reasons why this movie is one of my favorite movies of all time, I'd probably put this in like, you know, a top 10 to top 20 favorite movies of all time, isn't just because of the emotional power, but also just the simple fact that this is one of the best directed films I have ever seen in my entire life. Most of this movie is your main character. You know, he wants to commit Harakiri, but before he commits Harakiri, you know, he's like on this pad. He's on this pad. He's getting ready to do it, and he's surrounded by a couple dozen samurai, you know, who are going to watch this honorable death. But before he does it, he wants to tell a story, and the story involves these same samurai, and he's basically saying, like, you guys are dishonorable and all this stuff, blah blah blah. Now, almost the whole movie, and this movie exceeds 2 hours. Almost the entire movie is just people sitting in that same spot. It's him on the pad, the samurai surrounding him, and almost nobody ever moves from that position. Now, as he tells his story, it'll cut to the story as he's telling it. So you see a lot of movement when you're within the story he's telling, but a lot of the movie is when you're not when you're not in the story, but you're watching him tell the story, and no one ever moves. Yet it is still, I mean, the visuals are still amazing, though. Like, there's literally, like, no blocking or anything. It's all dialogue, yet it's never boring. You know, the director has a limited space to work with, but it never feels like he's limited by his space. He never repeats the same shot twice. His camera is always moving, and it's never, and every shot always seems to have its purpose, and he's able to draw a lot of emotional power just with his camera. He'll cut to someone's face, but he'll tilt the camera, and just that Dutch angle alone, kind of like, you're like, whoa, that's really powerful. One of my favorite shots in the entire movie is the lead samurai on his pad, and he's on his knees, kind of lunged over. He's telling his story, and the camera starts behind him and dollies in on him as he's telling the story from behind. And so he's telling these really powerful points of his story, but you don't even get to see his face. And that was really powerful to me. It reminded me of Bergman's The Virgin Spring, when Max von Sydow gives the climactic final monologue of the film, and it's all shot from behind him, and you don't even get to see the expressions of his face. Really ballsy to do that. You know, everyone's like, oh no, we gotta pull the tears out of the audience here. You gotta get a close up of the face. But it's like, no, let's do something different. Let's shoot it from behind and see what we get. So, you know, and like I said, the camera is never still. It is always moving. I mean, there's a few static shots. But for the most part, it's like, if you sometimes you have to look at, like, the edge of the frame. It'll just be slightly dolling, you know, or slightly moving it, you know. And so, like I said, I'm floored by this movie because of how impacting it is emotionally, and it just might be the most well-directed movie I've ever seen. And you've seen the influence from this kind of filmmaking later on with, like, Scorsese, you know, always moving his camera, Spielberg always moving his camera. So Masaki Kobayashi, I'm probably saying that wrong again. What a great filmmaker. This is the only film of his that I've seen, but I've heard a lot of great things about, like, Samurai Rebellion and Kwaidan, and I think he is obviously one of the great Japanese filmmakers, just from what I've read, from what I've seen, you know, up there with Kurosawa. So that's my number 2 choice for my favorite film of the 60s is Harakiri by Masaki Kobayashi from 1962. The Graduate, directed by Mike Nichols, 1967. Boom, a classic, an unforgettable movie. This, I don't know if this is, like, you know, my favorite film of the 60s or not. I mean, I gave really high praise to Harakiri just now, but I chose to save this one for the last because this is also in a top 10, top 20 favorite movies of all time list for me, and mostly because of the personal reaction I get out of it, and it's something that everyone can relate to. You know, Dustin Hoffman, he's fresh out of high school, or fresh out of college, or I think it's high school. Sorry, it's been a while since I've seen the movie, but he has tons of choices that he has to make with his life. You know, he's like, is he going to go on to do more schooling? Is he going to try to get a job? You know, he has a really good offer to work in plastics, and he basically doesn't know what he wants to do with his life because he doesn't even really know who he is at this point in his life, and that's kind of what he wants to do. He just kind of wants to find himself. That's my interpretation of the film. And by doing that, he does a lot of strange things. You know, meets a woman, ends up sleeping with her mother, tries to get the woman back, and you know, it's everyone has seen this movie. Everyone knows what happened, so I won't go too far into the story. But just what a powerful experience. You know, it's like when you see a movie and you're just like, dude, I'm on screen right now. That's me. This movie knows what I'm going through. This is one of those movies, at least for me. Like, I just feel like this movie was meant for me, you know, and I've kind of been there. You know, I don't want to get too personal right now, but when I got out of high school, I kind of had the same sort of situation. It's like, what was I gonna do next? You know, I could have gone to school. I could have gone to a university, done the 4-year thing. I could have gone to a film school, which you know, maybe in retrospect would have been the better thing to do. I don't know, but I chose not to do that. I chose just to kind of live, to kind of find out who I was, and I don't really regret that decision, because now I feel like I know who I am, and I know what I love to do. And in that time, I watched this movie a bunch because it was the movie I needed to see for not just that point in my life, but just because it's a movie that will help you find your way, you know. I don't know if people watching me talk about this movie right now are just kind of rolling their eyes and being like, what's this dude talking about? Like, The Graduate, yeah, it's a great movie, but I mean, that's not what The Graduate's about. Well, I don't care. That's what it's about for me. You know, real quick, I'll talk about Mike Nichols. I miss Mike Nichols, man. I miss him so much. He made some of just the most incredible movies ever. You know, before this, he did Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. After this, like Catch-22, Biloxi Blues, Postcards from the Edge, Working Girl. Like, he just made these amazing, amazing movies. I miss the hell out of him. You know, he hadn't made a movie. He passed away a year ago, maybe a year and a half or 2 years ago. It was pretty recent, and he hadn't made a movie since, I'm looking for it on my shelf, since Charlie Wilson's War, and that was, I was ashamed, because because it's a really good movie, but it was so long ago, and on IMDb before he passed away, he had some projects that he was lining up that he was going to do. One being a remake, like an American remake of Kurosawa's High and Low. That would have been really, really interesting. You know, so Mike Nichols is one of my favorite filmmakers. At this time in his career, he was really experimental, and you've seen him be homaged to and ripped off and parodied in so many movies. You know, Wayne's World 2 specifically, you know, where Wayne is trying to stop the wedding, and you know, that comes directly from this movie. You know, Soderbergh ripped off the car shot where the camera's on the back of the car. He ripped that off, and Sex, Lies, and Videotape and Ocean's 11. Paul Thomas Anderson, you know, ripped off the famous, you know, camera going into the pool shot from this movie in Boogie Nights. So he's a really innovative filmmaker, a really creative filmmaker, an influential filmmaker. I miss him a lot. He's one of my personal favorites. And this is my favorite film of his. Really touching. Actually, it says that right here. His movie's really touching, and Nichols made a lot of really touching movies. You have to see Wit, and you have to see Angels in America. So, kind of getting back to The Graduate, this was my #1 pick for my top 5 favorite movies of the 60s. So this is The Graduate. Mike Nichols is The Graduate from, I forgot the year. I gotta look for it again, even though I already said it, from 1967. Launched Dustin Hoffman's career, and is a classic. So, that was a long video. Thank you for sticking with me through all of that. That was my top 5 favorite of the 50s. Before I sign off, I'd like to give you some honorable mentions. Some ones that I really wanted to talk about, but I had to narrow it down to 5. But real quick, I'm going to buzz through a quick list of honorable mentions that I couldn't go without saying, of other great movies of the 60s. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, Easy Rider, Last Year at Marion Bad, Bonnie and Clyde. Those are, if I did another top 5 video, I'd probably talk about those ones. And to recap the movies I did talk about, Don't Look Back by D.A. Pennebaker, Vivre sa vie, excuse me, by JeanLuc Godard, 2001: A Space Odyssey by Stanley Kubrick, Harakiri by Masaki Kobayashi, and lastly, The Graduate by Mike Nichols. So that's my top 5 of the 60s. Stay tuned for my top 5 of the 70s.